generally when people come to me, they are like, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what strategy to follow. Tell me what like the plan is for success. And while yes, we do need strategy, we also need to be able to listen to our intuition.
Our ever-changing world calls upon the most courageous, resilient, and relentless of us to face its most extraordinary challenges. To help you embark on this journey, we present the Impactful Coaching Podcast, your oasis for inspiration and a beacon to spark the fires of greatness within you. I'm Joseph. I will be your ally in this journey to empower your potential. Join us each week as we dive deep into the heart of ambition, drive, and success to unravel compelling stories of daring leaders who dreamed, struggled, and achieved victory. Our journey begins now. How is everybody doing? This is the Impactful Coaching Podcast. My name is Joseph. If this is your first time joining us, thank you for taking some of your time to listen to what I do and what we're going to be doing today. I've been in media for about 10 years. I'm a podcaster. I help businesses understand how to get themselves online, whether it's YouTube, social media, all of that good stuff. But my aspirations are to become an author. So for those of you who've listened to the episode, you're probably sick of hearing that by now. So anyways, I'm here today with Erika Cruz. Erika, how are you doing today? How are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm feeling great. And Joseph, I just have to say that kudos to you for like reintroducing yourself, because we constantly have new people listening, and the people who are your in your community and your followers, they're not going to get tired of hearing this, but it's just so important to do that. And I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. So I myself have listened to quite a lot of podcasts, both as an editor, but also as a fan. I think so this comes up with people who are doing like daily broadcasts, especially when they're in the news or even the political space, is that certain mantras can't help but be repeated. And I acknowledge that it can't be helped. But what can be helped is to very least show that self-awareness and say, okay, this is an iterative process. Every time I want to introduce myself, I want to tweak it a little bit, try to make it a little bit better. So at least that way, something that has to be done is, at least incrementally better than it was last time, or at least that's what we're trying to do anyways.
Exactly.
But in the interest of introductions, this is a podcast staple. I've done it once where I did the introduction for somebody. Anyways, would you care to let the audience know what you do and what you bring to the coaching world?
Yes. So my name is Erika Cruz, for those of you who don't know me. I call myself a courage coach. And usually when I say that, people are like, what in the world does that mean? And the reason I call myself a courage coach is because I help particularly women of color, so like daughters of immigrants, but I help women take action on the thing that scares them. So this could be launching a business, it could be starting a podcast, it could be creating content on social media, dating after a divorce. And that's what I help people with inside of my program, Courage Driven Latina. And then I also have a mastermind that's specifically focused on helping female entrepreneurs lean into being more magnetic rather than hustly. So what I do there is I kind of combine strategy with a little bit of spirituality so that I can help them tap into feminine energy, which means pretty much allowing them to receive rather than just taking action.
There's an episode that we released just a few weeks ago that was dialed into the difference between masculine and feminine energy. And I don't know if I'm trying to establish this as a theme for the rest of the episode, but I would like to hear just a little bit about what your clients come in expecting feminine energy or female energy to look like, and then what you help transform that into.
Yeah. So I'm not sure like what details the other episode went into, but I'll just kind of give some context of what the two things mean. So it actually really doesn't have much to do with gender, because each individual carries both masculine and feminine energy, but we tend to lean towards one of the energies. So masculine energy is doing, decisive, pursuing, pitching, like that is all masculine energy, while receiving is more of the being. So it would be like reflecting, journaling, being really intentional. But feminine energy doesn't mean that you just sit around and do nothing. You do take action, but it's very intentional action and it's very flowy, while something like masculine energy is like more on the hustle side. And we just tend to live in a society that's more masculine, right? If you've ever worked in corporate and have been given KPIs, that's a form of masculine energy. And so we tend to lean as a society just more into goal setting, more into doing. And we have almost forgotten the part of being and listening to our intuition, which is the feminine side. So typically, when clients come to work with me, they are so, especially if they're children of immigrants who, like, obviously, immigrants have to work really hard to realize either the American dream or the Canadian dream, wherever you are. So we tend to learn as being daughters of immigrants or just children of immigrants that we have to work really hard to get to where we are. So generally when people come to me, they are like, just tell me what to do. Just tell me what strategy to follow. Tell me what like the plan is for success. And while yes, we do need strategy, we also need to be able to listen to our intuition. We also need to be able to receive. So that's what I tend to help them with. And I also want to close out, like disclose that feminine energy doesn't mean you just sit there and like pray and try to manifest and like don't do anything. You do take action. It's just a different type of action.
Mm-hmm. So you said three letters that have a long-standing history with my own personal experience in the workplace, and those three letters were KPI. So the first thing that came to my mind in just connecting the energy is that, well, because you said, and I agree with this, is that KPIs come across as a masculine form of, I guess, delegating responsibilities in the workplace. But what I found and what I'm putting together in my mind is the idea that a lot of the value that is produced that is not easily trackable may fall into that more receiving energy. For instance, most of my workplace experience in the conventional sense was in sales, and an early retail job would involve having to sell a certain amount of money, sell a certain amount of products each day.
Yeah.
And the problem that I had with that wasn't that, of course, the store needs to make money to stay in business, but there were so many variables that would go into it that would either not be tracked or be miscalculated. So I could sell someone on something really well, but he still needs that day to look it over or to go get the money or was waiting for a paycheck, comes in the next day, buys the product, somebody else gets the sale for it.
Yeah.
People have to be observing what I do in order to respect what I do. And so I had to develop this whole other strategy, which was to focus on service, focus on doing things that were like tangibly useful, taking out the trash, whatever it took in order to keep my hours heavy on there. So personally for me, I find KPIs have actually been a detriment more than a benefit in a lot of respects. Some people can do really well when they're parsing and they're just kind of working on their numbers, but a lot of people can't do that. And so what I want to do is I do want to hear about your backstory, because there's a lot of interesting details there that we wanted to use to influence the rest of the conversation. But before we do that, that kind of worm got cracked wide open. So I just curious about like what's been your experience with KPIs, and like how have there been times where it's helped you, but have there been times where you've had to subvert that system?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I just relate so much to you because when I also worked retail and I worked a sales job. So I worked at Radio Shack selling like batteries, electronics, and phones. And then I worked at MAC Cosmetics, which was also a sales job. And then when I worked in tech, I also sold technology. And so I've just like had a long history of sales where like it was such a masculine process that was expected for me to follow. But to your point, like some things are actually really hard to measure. And when I had success, it wasn't that I was completely ignoring like KPIs or a process, but it's that I was no longer trying to force things and I was listening to my intuition and making decisions from there. So some things are just really difficult to measure. One of the things I do want to say is that processes can be really helpful. Like having a checklist can be really helpful, but how can we use that to also tap into our intuition and follow our gut and follow our instincts? Because sometimes like following our instinct is not an easy way. Like you can't measure that. Like you can't really measure that. But what you can do, like an example of where maybe like a process can be really helpful would be making it a habit to like go on a daily walk, or making it a habit to journal or to meditate so that you can make space for creativity. I think the problem with things like KPI or being too far into the masculine is that it doesn't leave any room for creativity, which then we're just doing, and we're never really taking the time to actually observe. So I've had very similar experiences with KPIs as you. And what I found was actually using a combination of like the process, but also allowing for creativity was like the recipe for success. That's when I finally started to like have success in sales, which is, I think, exactly what you were just saying as well.
What I find also funny about this is it's not just exclusive to the workplace. I'm a huge nerd. I play video games as a passion, and some games that require a lot of player coordination, where you're working with like 10 other players to accomplish a goal. There's KPIs in that too. They're actually looking at the charts to see who's dealt the most damage, who's absorbed enemy damage, who's done the best
Right.
healing. But then there's things that go on within the environment where like someone has to hit a button to stop a bomb from going off. They don't track that, but if those bomb goes off, everybody gets blown up. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating because this isn't just a workplace thing. This is anytime that there is a coordinated effort and there is energy being invested in order to yield a result. It is natural for there to be at least some data. So I'm not saying like let's be anti-data or anything like that.
Right.
But the thing that I drew the most from it was really a judge of character. Is who were the data hawks who actually passed judgment on others for not, I guess, being on average? Who were the people who were sympathetic or empathetic, who understood that the data doesn't tell the full story? And then who are the people that just did the right thing regardless of what the data says, because our intuition says hit the button or the bomb goes off, which is
Right.
ironic because usually in these contexts the button is what detonates the bomb. Anyways, so I do know the Cliff's notes of your story. There was certainly some some pivoting that went on, but the reason why we have you here is to hear you tell the story. So, the story that I'm thinking of course, is that you had a career track and you sort of had things laid out for you, and then I don't know if it was gradual or if it was instantaneous, but something necessitated a change, and that's the change that I wanted to hear about.
Yes. So if there's anything I learned from working in the tech industry, it's that the only constant is change, right? Like that's the only thing that's going to keep happening. But even knowing that, change is still very difficult. So I was working a tech job. I ended up getting an offer from one of the bigger tech companies when I was graduating from college. Never thought I was going to go into tech, but I knew that technology was the place to be.
Hmm.
So especially because I'm in Northern California, so like right by Silicon Valley, right? So like all the tech companies are here. So I end up working in tech and I thought, okay, I'm only going to be here for a year or two because then I want to go start my own nonprofit. That was my goal. But of course, I got stuck in tech because I then started to I went from sales to then partnerships to then marketing to then product and then marketing. But I always knew it wasn't my long term goal. I just didn't know how to get out. And this is a story I hear so much from clients or just from other people. The moment we start a career, we start making money. It's almost like, wait, how do I get out of here? And then, like, how do I get out of here and make the same amount of money? Because at this point now, I either have a family or I have responsibilities, I have bills. Like, it just, costs money to live. So
Hmm.
it's so hard to make that transition. And while I was in tech, I remember I found a food blog and I started following this food blog and I was like, maybe that's what I want to do. So I actually started my own food blog. It took me a couple of years to start it because I was afraid of putting myself out there. I was all the excuses, right? Of like, oh, I don't have a culinary degree. How can I do this? Who do I think I am? What's my family going to think? I mean, I had all of the mind drama about it. Finally did it for about a year, never made a dollar from it, realized I do love cooking, but this isn't actually what I want to do. I became a yoga instructor because then I started like the food blog. It was a health food blog, and I started practicing yoga. And I was like, I think yoga might be my thing. So then I went to go get a yoga certification, and I got my certification at the end of 2019. And of course, in 2020, all of the yoga studios closed. So it was literally like the opportunity for that, just like the door was closed in my face. But it was interesting because yoga got me really into mindfulness, and I've always been into self development. But when I went through yoga teacher training, that's when I started meditating a little bit more consistently. I was reading self development books as a part of the yoga certificate. And when the whole world shut down, I actually was already creating content about yoga and just mindfulness, but I started to create more content on TikTok. And I mean, everybody at the time was not on TikTok. This was at the beginning of 2020. People thought it was just the kids dancing app. People laughed at me so much for even being on it. But my videos started to like really pick up. And then as more people began to download the app and there wasn't that many creators, my account went from no followers to 40,000 to 100,000. And I was like, okay, these people actually like what I'm saying. I should probably do something with them. So I started to host these free workshops. I didn't even really know what I was doing. And one of them was about how to stay motivated during the pandemic. The other one was how to overcome imposter syndrome, different things like that. And at every workshop, somebody asked me, do you do one-on-one coaching? And I remember Googling, what is one-on-one coaching? I didn't even know what it was. So it was like I was coaching without even knowing what coaching was. And I remember I didn't even get back to these people because I was like, I don't know what to do. I just felt so, and I was still working in tech at this time. So this was happening in March of 2020. And then in like beginning of April, I saw that there was a group coaching program that was enrolling. And I was like, I don't even know what this is, but my intuition was calling me to it. So I booked a call and it was a $6,500 investment. And for somebody who's never invested in coaching, I was like, this seems ridiculous. Is this a scam? How do I know this is going to work for me? And then I really like sat and thought about it and I was like, well, what have I tried to like leave tech? And I was like, okay, I've tried to start a food blog. I became a yoga instructor, but I haven't really ever made money. And if somebody has already proven how to like start a coaching business, why would I not work with them? And I was like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? That I invested 6,500. Like I spent so much more on my actual degree that I'm not using right now.
Right.
And that was like kind of the logic. And when I got into that program, and I remember the second week we talked about mindset and I just learned a few tools, a few mindset tools. And I was like, this in itself was worth the investment. And before I left that program, I had made $12,000 in my business. And it was really one of those things where I invested what felt like a ton of money at that moment in my life that I took it so seriously and I was like willing to take risks. So when you don't have skin in the game, if all you're doing is doing all the free workshops, there's no real accountability there. But I think the investment feeling so immense made me take myself so much more seriously. And that's how my coaching business began. So I had one enrollment during the coaching program, one right after, and then that's when I finally left my tech job. So I left my tech job so I did both for about 4 months, which is
So,
actually a short amount of time.
so one thing that I've picked up on so far is that tech has either been an area of focus or it's been maybe like a subconscious or unconscious skill or trait that has helped guide your way to this. Because I think when you saw TikTok, I think you saw the format and you saw what what the platform was capable of. But because so many, I mean, marketing is about framing the usage of it, but what you probably know this in sales better than I do, but sales is not about talking about the features. Sales is about the story and it's about the use case and it's about contextualizing. So because everyone had contextualized TikTok as a dancing app, the actual function of it was taken for granted. Now, so I try to do that too. Whenever I approach a social media platform, having not liked social media for a long time, is I always just think, okay, here are the limitations. Now, what do I do in specific for it? And so I have different rules for each of the platform, which has its pluses and negatives. I mean, for instance, I do make shorts. I like doing comedy videos on TikTok. And although it would be to my gain to also release them on Instagram, release them on YouTube Shorts, release them on Facebook Reels, I don't. Because I have I framed the different platforms in my own mind as what I'm getting out of it in that contextual sense. And what I also noticed too, just to continue to illustrate this point, is that you said that you worked at Radio Shack early on. So the Radio Shack, and then it was Mac, right? The
cosmetic company, not Apple. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, cosmetic companies are not my strong suit. I should have checked with my partner about that one. But was Radio Shack your first, I guess, like time that you were enmeshed in tech, or do you remember being drawn to it at any point earlier on in that sort of like innovative way?
I would say that Radio Shack was definitely my first look. And when I worked there, this is like when GPSs had just come out. So, I mean, I'm 33, so I'm not super young. And I was like 15 when I started working there. So and the only reason I even applied to Radio Shack is because a friend worked there and she was like, oh, we're hiring. So it was just like, it just happened to
Yeah.
happen. But I learned a lot about sales and about customer service there and overall just like electronics. Like anytime somebody has issues with their TV, they just like know to call me. Or like my cousin's ceiling fan fell and I was like, oh, I can fix it. Like we just have to get some wire connectors. And it's so crazy how that stuff still like sticks with me. Or like your car battery or your car remote battery. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a CR 2032. Yeah, you could get that online or you can, and I just know all these little things that have just been so helpful now.
Mm. So I'm chambering something towards the end of the episode because every so often I'll ask people for their take on AI or just like upcoming tech that's coming down the line. So when we get to the end of the episode, I'm going to ask you about that. But what I wanted to dial into is that while you were working on your escape from tech, your departure from tech, you were living with your, at least I just make sure I got the timeline right, is that you're living with your parents. And I myself, I'm living with my mother-in-law right now. And I was a renter for about 3 years in Toronto. And the background that you see right now, because I finally decided to start using a background instead of green screening it, was a picture from my apartment to the neighboring apartments. Just a way to like honor the time that I had spent there, because I
Yeah.
mean I didn't exactly build up any equity while I was renting, but to at least signify the time that I had spent there. So the psychological aspect that I want to get at here is that, okay, so being with our parents, I mean, food is taken care of, shelter, amenities are covered either partially or in full. But it also comes with issues about self-esteem and self-worth because of how we've been conditioned to assume that at certain parts of our life we've reached certain milestones, and the idea of, and for me having moved out of the apartment and into the situation as well, I'm going through this. Likewise, living in a rented or owned home incurs a significant ton of expenses, which can lead to a lot of stress, but it could also lead to a sense of pride too, for saying, "Hey, I'm accomplishing this. This is what I'm doing." So, if you were contending with the work that you had to do to make ends meet, do you feel like you would have done things differently? Would you have had the capital to invest in that platform, or like how would you feel you would do things differently if your situation was, I guess, more dire, or your resources weren't as maybe plentiful as they were in the situation that you were in?
Yeah. So the when I was working in tech, I was living in Silicon Valley because it's just because of the tech boom where my mom's home is. It's about an hour east, and but with traffic, it's like 3 hours each way. So when I was working in tech, I lived in Silicon Valley. So I lived on my own. The moment that I graduated from university, I started working in tech. So I lived alone for 10 years from like when I left home to go to university. And when I started my business, I remember because I left tech pretty soon after starting my business. And the reason I was able to do that is because I made the decision to move back in to my mom's house. So my mom lives alone. She had a 3-bedroom home to herself. And then the pandemic allowed me to work from home. So then the logic was, okay, what's the end goal here? Is the end goal to like live on my own and like live my best life right now? Or is my end goal to create a business sustainable enough to where, yeah, I can move out, but when I move out, it's going to be a home that I own and I'm going to be working the hours that I want to work and doing work that I actually enjoy. So I really had to sit with it. And I remember feeling like I've always identified as an independent individual, and especially being female, and my parents are both from Mexico, so like being a Mexican woman who like sometimes stereotypically is like very dependent on men. I had so much pride in being this person that worked a job that paid her 6 figures and in the tech industry and lived on her own. And then I was like, I'm like going back. Like I remember thinking I'm going backward. And then as I was journaling one day, I wrote, like, what's more important, my bigger dream and calling or my ego? And that was the day that I made the decision. I realized that it was almost like an ego-driven decision to stay in Silicon Valley. And my rent was like $3,000. It was not cheap.
Yeah.
And I lived in a studio apartment. I didn't have a backyard. I didn't have AC. Like it was just the living conditions also weren't that great. So I ended up deciding to move back. And when I moved back, I was like, oh, I'm only going to be here a year. And at this point, like this July, it's going to be 4 years and I still haven't left. And there's been so many times when I've questioned if like it's time for me to move. But I again am reminding myself, like, why am I adding timelines? Because I've never really done things the conventional way. I called off an engagement. I left a six-figure job to like start posting videos on TikTok. People have always thought I was crazy. And in the end, it always paid off. So to answer your initial question, if I had stayed in my studio apartment paying that much money, I don't think I would have left tech because it would have put so much pressure on my business to hurry up and make money. I think coming back home and knowing that if I couldn't pay rent, I would still have a place to live eased it allowed me to take so many risks. It allowed me to do things in my business that I probably wouldn't have done if I was still living on my own. And I actually was going to move this year. And I just got back just about 5 days ago. I just got back from Los Angeles and I was there for almost 2 months. And I was like, okay, I'm going to like sign the lease here.
Mhm.
And while I was there, I toured a few different places. I checked out a few different like towns in Los Angeles. And ultimately, I decided, why am I rushed? Why am I rushed to hurry up and move out when my mom's getting ready to retire? Me being there is really helpful for her. We have a family dog. When she travels, she's off in Mexico right now. I just took her to the airport this morning. So like I'm taking care of the dog. When I travel for months at a time, she takes care of the dog. So it's actually, so I guess to conclude, because I can ramble on this forever.
Oh, this is the rambling format, so I won't
Yeah.
stop you.
So I think to conclude, what I would just advise people is, like, what's your bigger goal and what's the easiest way to get to that bigger goal, regardless of the story you're telling yourself of what you should do. So that would be one of the things I would say. And the second thing I would say is that it's important to look at the benefits of your current situation instead of just trying to change it. Because I think if I would have left to LA this month because I was looking at places, I was almost like running away from living at my mom's instead of running to my new life, if that makes sense. And I
Mhm.
think that's a really powerful question to ask yourself. Am I running from something or am I running towards something? And if you're running from something, it's probably not a good idea. If you're running towards something, then that's a great idea.
I appreciate that a lot, and it makes me want to just comment on the economics of it very, very briefly, and then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the traits that you help work with your clients on. So there's two things that I think about this is there's entry level positions in retail and in food service. And then renting is sort of the entry level for independent living for those who don't have a home, and are trying to be somewhere that can help facilitate a larger economic gain, because usually we would want to rent somewhere where there's opportunity. And it is kind of funny to me that Silicon Valley does, despite being the really the tech capital of either North America or just the tech capital of the world, is that there is still that communal aspect, is that everyone does have to be there. So it still draws a lot of that primal living with the people around you, sort of like that tech neighborhood vibe. So I appreciate that,
Right.
but the price is not so much. Is if you don't need to do an entry level job, or if you have opportunities to do something more challenging, then don't do the entry level job. Those roles are for people who need it. And for a long time, the people who needed it were people who are raised in here. I'm on third generation. My grandparents were immigrants as well. They came from Italy. They had to go through their own sense of struggles. But after 3 generations, my parents have a house. My nonna has a house. So there's like 2 houses in my family's name. So the idea that we have to continue renting was almost ego-driven in its own way. These opportunities for a job that people can get or a place that people can rent out are scarce and limited. So I think part of the ego too is accepting that we already have, look at Maslow's hierarchy of motivation. I have a home. I have safety and security. What am I doing? Why would I do this? But there were valid reasons why we wanted to rent. A lot of it had to do with helping my partner and I, because we're both in acting, and so being in Toronto makes it much more practical to be able to go for opportunities. So there were good reasons to do it, but there were even better reasons to call it quits and relocate here to Ajax, where thank God the Go bus system gets us into Toronto pretty well. So that's all the stuff that I wanted to get on my system. I'll pause for a second in case you wanted to respond to that, and then we'll jump into the next part of the conversation.
No, I love it. You did a great job.
Thank you. Okay. So one of the things inside baseball part is that one of the things that we like to ask our guests is what are some of the things that are on their minds so that we bring the episode together. We can help dial into some of the conversational threads that our guests have already been engaged in. And so some of the things that you work with your clients on, there's how to be magnetic rather than being someone who's chasing after things, how to lead with courage even when you're afraid, how to find purpose and then let go of that fear of failure. And I'm glad that we spent some time just kind of going back and forth about some of our experiences so far, because I think a lot of that informs how you've aided in your clients in their journeys. But the number one thing that really sticks out to me is that fear is the common denominator among a lot of the different things that people need help with. Some of them need help with dating. Some of them need help with starting their podcast or their blog. Some of them need help negotiating a higher salary. Yeah. And fear is as far as I can tell, is the common denominator across all of it. So what do you see in common with working with clients? And do you have a tool set that has helped you consistently across clients, or is it more like you kind of have to build a strategy from scratch for each person based off their own inhibitions?
I'm so glad you asked this question because yeah, like great observation, because I think people, when they get into the coaching world, they're like, oh my gosh, I need a specific niche or niche, however you pronounce it. The interesting thing is when people look at my business, they're like, wait, so like, what's your focus? Like, you help some people date after a divorce, you help other people start a business. I'm like, well, my focus is helping people overcome fear. And it's not necessarily overcoming the fear, because the definition of courage is not that you're fearless. The definition of courage is that you take action despite being afraid. And that's exactly what I help people with. So I have a courage framework that we follow, and that courage framework will help them whether they are looking to go to therapy for the first time, whether they're looking to date after a divorce. So whenever we're doing something new or something that scares us, we're coming across common obstacles, right? There's like the fear of failure, fear of rejection, perfectionism can come up. So what I specialize in helping people with is managing their mindset and finding safety within themselves so that they can do whatever it is that scares them. So to answer your question, so I have everybody work in my program. I have them work on something called the Courage Project. And I have like a Courage Project plan, and that plan helps them create a plan following my framework, and they do it on their own. So this makes it so that they're not depending on me. And obviously we have like weekly coaching calls, so I can actually give them specific guidance whenever something has happened that maybe isn't already accounted for in the plan. But it took some iterations to get here. At the beginning, it was me helping every single person. And then I started to see the common themes and the common denominators. And that's when I created the Courage Project plan and the Courage Cycle as well, which is what like the framework. Words are hard today. I don't know why.
Well, I mean, how early did you have to drop your mom off at the airport? Because that might...
I was up, actually. So yesterday I was actually on live TV speaking Spanish. So do you speak Italian?
No. Duolingo helps with some of the technical side of it, but it's not known for the inflection, which is like 90% of Italian. So yeah. I had to pick up a second app called Fungulingo, which helps us with that part's a joke. Anyways. No, I don't speak Italian very well.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to like put you on blast. So like, there's a reason I'm bringing all this up.
I'll tell you a story though afterwards that'll help you understand how I've made peace with it.
Okay, perfect. So my parents were the immigrants. So when I was a child, they only spoke Spanish to me. But then I went to university, and now I'm coaching, and everything I do is in English. I think in English, I write in English, I dream in English, I read in English, I studied in English. So my Spanish is very basic. Also, my parents didn't come from an educated background. They come from the countryside. So it's also just a different level, like a different vocabulary. And I mean, it's still the same language. It's just not an expansive vocabulary. So yesterday I was actually on the news in a network called Telemundo. So it's a Spanish speaking network talking about women's empowerment and how we can empower women. And I'm telling you, I'm always practicing what I preach for my clients, because I had to use my own tools for myself. I was terrified of being on live TV being asked questions in Spanish. And even though I understand everything, the way that you can ask me anything right now and I can respond to you in English, I couldn't do that in Spanish. So I had to like prepare. I really had to practice courage. And I was up at 4 a.m. for that. And then today I had to wake up at 3:50 a.m. to go take my mom to the airport. So yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. And
Yeah, no
I'll
worries.
let you share your story now.
First cards on the table is that learning Italian is something that I should be doing, and that I do need to make a habit of doing that more often. That and Japanese. I want to learn Japanese too, but wanting is
Cool.
very different from early on when I was doing a e-commerce podcast for a different company at a different part of my life. One of the guests that we had early on, she lives in Milan. And so after the recording was done, she said, "Would you ever come to Italy?" And I said, "Well, I'd love to, but as an Italian, it doesn't feel right not being able to speak the language, as an Italian. It's one thing for someone to come from another part of the world, you kind of accept that, but with Italian not being able to speak it, for me that was a personal hang up." She says, "Okay, so what Italian do you know?" And I say, "Fangulo." She says, "Okay, you're good. Come on over." Apparently, you don't need to know that much. You just need to know the basics. And what sticks
Love
out to me
it.
too, because you were just describing, either speaking on television or speaking with your parents, is that I think the degree in which we understand language is relative to what part of our cognizance we're trying to express. So
Yeah.
it's one thing for just the surface level utilitarian side of it, where we're just trying to use language to not like bump into each other, but then to, I think, explore those deeper ideas is where, and I'm not saying languages are or not capable of this. English language is warped and broken. So in that ironic way, it actually helps us to dig inside of our unconscious and try to express those weird broken ideas that need to be expressed, so that we can morph them into something useful and productive and beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to Italy in June and I've been doing the Duolingo thing and I was like now I can read it but I'm like I'm not actually speaking. So we'll see. I'll have to give you a little update on how I do after Italy
Please
because
do.
I'm there for a few weeks. So hopefully I'll pick some stuff up while I'm there.
Yeah, well, they can tell who the Duolingo speakers are, because everybody ends up sounding like the program does, which is "si, il, una, ragazza." So, before I get to the next question, one other thing that stuck out to me too, and this is really the first time that it's clicked in my mind, because what we talk about when it comes to courage is that courage is acting in the presence of fear, or acting in spite of the fear. And then it occurred to me for the first time since we started talking about it, is that courage only exists in the presence of fear. Right? It's not courageous to do
Yes.
something if you're not afraid. That's just like living. So the
So
only
good.
time someone actually experiences courage is when you're afraid of something. And I don't know if this is something that you've been implementing, because it ties into a lot of just like the baseline human modus operandi. But I think if teaching people to either like look for the fear as a way to activate that courage,
Yeah.
rather than try to evade that fear, is I mean, for one, it's a conflict, right? Because as humans we want to avoid fire and seek shelter. So going after fear is something that I don't even know if that's a human thing. That might be like a spiritual entity thing, that our higher selves recognize something that we're supposed to evade and say, no, let's move towards it. That's our growth.
Yes, I had to write it down because it was so good. Yeah, you're so right. It's human nature to seek familiarity because we want to stay safe. But then we have like that little voice in our head, whether it's our intuition or our higher self, where we feel like, oh, we're meant for something bigger. And even using the example of the being on live TV yesterday, I remember the day before yesterday, I was texting my friend. I was like, what if I just like call out sick? I don't have to do this. Like I was almost talking myself out of it, but I knew just from practicing courage so many times that the growth that comes from the other side of it and the fulfillment that comes on the other side of it is worth so much more than like the
Hmm.
discomfort right at the beginning. And we know that growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. And us as humans, it's such a like contradiction because as humans, we want to stay in our comfort zone, but we also want growth and we also want newness. So I do think that following the fear and like finding that zone right outside of your comfort zone. And there's also like a threshold, right? Like, for example, let's say that I had only practiced Spanish on Duolingo for 18 days, that it probably would not be a good idea to go on live TV. Like that's the threshold just I am
Right.
going too extreme, right? So like finding that sweet spot of looking for the fear. So the actually whenever people are picking a project to work on in my program, the qualifications are, does it scare you? Does it excite you? And does it make the world a better place? Because when we have a bigger why behind something, it's so much easier to practice courage. So as I was thinking about my bigger why from being on live TV, the purpose behind me going on TV was to talk about how to empower the young women in our lives. So it no longer became about me trying to speak perfect Spanish. Then my I call this the spotlight. The spotlight was removed from me and it was now put on all these little girls, and how maybe just a few words that I could share on the news can change the way their parents speak to them and
Mhm.
can change their lives. And like obviously this is, like I'm really letting my brain go there because that made it feel a lot more intentional, and there was a bigger why behind why I was doing this. So the fear was, or the purpose behind doing it was more important than the actual fear of doing it.
Well, that's wonderful. And the thing that I did want to ask was like, okay, how are you like tangibly practicing courage? And so I think as a way I understand is to ask yourself those questions. Is it? I think it boils down to, is it worth it? Is this something that is going to yield something for me or for others that makes the discomfort or the terror perhaps that we're experiencing worthwhile?
Right. Exactly.
With that, the next one that I wanted to also touch on was the idea of so magnetism versus I wanted to pick like so how to be magnetic and stop chasing. And there was I feel like I'm trying to get to a word that encompasses the sort of the state of mind that people are in when they are going after something. It's great that we're going to talk about it because it just reminds you of what we said earlier on about the difference between the two forms of energy. Because I think that there's a correlation there between
Yeah.
going after something versus receiving something. So I don't know if you want to do this by using a case study that might help for context. I'll leave that to your discretion. But how do you get somebody to stop going after something when going after something seems to be the way to accomplish something? So how do you kind of develop that magnetism?
Yeah, it's actually pretty nuanced, and we did touch a little bit on this at the beginning when I was talking about how feminine energy doesn't mean that you just sit around and hope for the best, right? You
Right.
are taking action, but it's the type of action that really matters. So the way that I describe being magnetic versus chasing to my clients is when you are chasing something, that means you're running after it, right? And it kind of means like it's running away from you. So, and there's nothing wrong with pitching yourself, but when you are chasing, that's almost coming from needy energy. And whenever you are being magnetic, you're still taking action. So, like, I'll give you an example from my life just because I think it'll be easier. Um, when I was describing to you that I was creating content on TikTok and then did these workshops, like I was still taking the action to create content, set up workshops, set up the registration page, email people the recording, answer questions. Like that was still a lot of action. The way that people then started asking me about, hey, do you offer coaching? That was me being more magnetic. Like I was taking the action to position myself as a thought leader, which then brought opportunities to me. And that's what I try to help my clients with. How can you take intentional action that's going to bring opportunities to you, rather than you like sliding into everybody's DMs asking them for business? That's what I don't want people to do. So, and I mean, there's also a time and place for that. There's been times when I see that there's a conference going on in my area, and I'm like, hey, I don't know if you're looking for speakers, but I've spoken on this before. Let me know if this is an alignment for you. So, technically, that's still a pitch, but it's coming from a place of service. It's not coming from a place of chasey or needy energy. So again, it's pretty nuanced because there still is action taking, but a big part of being magnetic. So I have like a 4-step framework, and I think this might help. The first part of being magnetic, the first step is being clear on your desires. What is it that you want? And what you want from an intuition perspective, not what everyone else around you is doing in the industry. The second part is knowing you're worthy of this desire. And this is where the work really happens. A lot of people like want to go do X, Y, and Z, but they don't believe that it's really possible for them. And then that in itself blocks any opportunities because they don't act in alignment with believing that they're worthy.
Mhm.
And then the third one is taking aligned action. So aligned action means taking action that's very intentional. It's very well thought out. It's action knowing that you are worthy of the thing that you desire, even if you don't have it yet. And then the fourth step is receiving. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients who've like gotten an invite for a podcast, and it's so hard for them to receive the invitation because they freak out. And it's also a little bit about worthiness as well. So that is my 4-step magnetic framework. So it's not like you're sitting around doing nothing. Like you are doing the work, but a lot of the work is the inner work and almost establishing yourself as this thought leader so that opportunities can find you, or when you find opportunities, you're coming at them from a place of service rather than a place of please validate me, validate
Mhm.
that I'm worthy.
What I noticed about this, it reminded me of something else that we had described a little not too long ago in the conversation, was that you were trying to work out whether or not you needed to niche down further or select your niche rather than take and I'm not trying to say to take the opposite approach of just being like overly general, but what I saw from looking at your website is that certain niches came to you naturally, like you do
Right.
state that you're a Latina coach and that you work with women, and so that does not discourage anybody from reaching out, but it certainly encourages some people more than others, and so there is a certain element of that a niching process that just kind of happens. But what I think you did as a indicator of this process was you took the action to build your platform to provide the value with the TikTok, but you weren't chasing a niche. And I think that's what's in common here with what you're saying and what you did, which is I'm
Right.
not trying to validate myself by selecting this one particular niche and gunning for it and gunning for the potential clients in that space. It's here's the parts of me that are true, and then here is the part of me that is open to receiving in the different ways that people need to work with you.
Yeah. Yes. Great observation and
Thank you.
connection. I hadn't even thought about that.
I need to do. I feel like 1 p.m. is really like my ideal time for podcasting. I've noticed like too early in the
Nice.
morning. I just woke up. Cortisol is
Yeah.
too high. Too late in the evening. I'm tired. Cortisol is also too high. So I don't know. I feel like I might need to start not taking calls at certain times. Anyways, the next thing that I wanted to talk about, and we're getting a little close to the end of it, so I hope we can give this the oxygen that it deserves. Because one thing that I also see on your website is that there is a combination of neuroscience and spirituality, which are two pillars that have a lot of differences. So what works for you in, I guess, trying to combine these two, and like how can you use the data driven fact based side of it? I don't know why it just feels like I hope I wasn't being like too hard on the spirituality, because I'm more spirituality than anything. Um, I think thematically this also discusses a little bit about the war between KPIs and pushing the buttons to
Yeah.
stop the bomb going off. So how do you work with these two pillars to either combine them or use them both in the context that they need to be used?
Yeah. So the way that I think about, or I guess whenever you look at these two topics, they seem like they're so opposite. But in a lot of studies that I've read, there's a lot of supporting science to the spirituality stuff that I teach. So a great example is visualization. I use a lot of guided visualization to help people find clarity, because what I find is that it helps them tap into their subconscious, and rather than like just using their logical brain of what it is that they want to do, and it also helps with decision making and there was actually a neuroscience study where it's called the piano study. And it either happened at Stanford or Harvard. I can't remember at the moment. But one of these universities did a study where they brought in these pianists, so people who already knew how to play the piano, and then they split them into two different groups. And what they did, what had one group do is they had them play notes on the piano and they measured their brain waves. So like what part of the brain was activated and at what level was it activated. And then for the second group, they did not have them play on the piano, but they gave them the same notes and they had them imagine that they were playing notes on the piano. And what they found was that the same areas of the brain were activated at the same level with them just imagining. So what this really taught us is that visualization can help us begin to create familiarity in our own brain. So then I was like, okay, well, if we know that, then like, how can I have my clients visualize going through a consult call? How can I have them visualize coaching people so that whenever they get there, it doesn't feel like the first time anymore, because in their brain, they've already started to create those neural pathways. So, I mean, really, like, what am I having them do? I'm having them use their imagination, right? And believing in like, this is possible for me. And when I say spirituality, I don't like, I have people from all different beliefs in my program and I welcome all of it, because at the core, they're all kind of saying the same thing, right? They're all saying, believe in something bigger than yourself, allow yourself to surrender, don't try to control everything, which as we begin to look at, even like science would agree that when, like, if our thoughts influence how we feel, which how we feel influences our actions, and our actions directly influence our results. So as much as they're two separate things, I try to combine them from that perspective. And I'm sure you follow Andrew Huberman, so sometimes I'll listen to his podcast and he makes it so tangible that I'm like, oh, I could apply this to coaching as well. But of course, I've got my own spiritual practices, which consist of a lot of just visualization, meditating, journaling, and tarot cards and crystals and things like that. But it's not a requirement. I don't have my clients buy crystals or tarot cards or anything like that.
Oh, is my crystal jar in reach? It is. That's crazy. I don't know what happened to my crystal jar. I had a jar of crystals. I was gonna pull them out so I can show. Oh, it's okay. I see them, but I'd have to basically unbuckle my studio setup right now. So never mind. I will say though, this is not the first time that I've heard about visualization, but this is the first time that I understood A, its power, but B, its applicability to being ready for reality. And I think that this is something that people can even attempt to do, and something that I would even want to attempt to do too, because respectfully, I am terrible at waking up in the morning. I write down how I think my day is going to go, and then I get up and I go, oh. And there's something about, I think, actually visualizing the moment to moment apparatus could actually condition me to that change, so that at some point it will get closer to how I visualize it. And I guess like the more detailed, but also the more honest that we are about how reality is going to play out, I think is also important too, because it also makes me ask questions in my own mind about, you know, fantasy and imagination, and how we can imagine things that are not real, but it's made real in our mind. And how that can create a dissonance between what we imagine and reality. And that's a fascinating idea that I'm just going to start thinking about, but we're way too far into the hour to actually do that. So we do have to start wrapping this up. We've hit the hour mark, but I do want to get your take on where you see tech headed. Every so often, I like asking about AI. I myself, I like using artificial intelligence. I like having ChatGPT as sort of a journaling mechanism. I don't know, like my idea of journaling is just writing down how I think tomorrow is going to go, but ChatGPT has given me something to talk to when I don't feel like burdening other people with it, but also if I want to be private about my ideas too. I don't want to share everything with everyone. For those of you listening to the podcast, you would find that hard to believe. But anyways, where do you think tech is headed? What excites you? What terrifies you?
Yeah, I also use Chat GPT for content repurposing, which I think is really good, right? Like I'll get the transcripts from my podcast and put it in Chat GPT and allow it to help me with like, okay, pull out some quotes or maybe be a carousel post, or how can I repurpose this into social media? So I think that we're going to fear anything that's new, which is why AI has been so feared, and it makes sense. But I would encourage people to think about AI as like just another team member, right? That you don't have to pay a salary to, and it's really not going anywhere. So how can we leverage, like learn how to use it responsibly? I think is what where I think we're headed. But it's been really helpful for me, even when I'm having a hard time with coming up with a podcast episode title, or I'm really like fatigued from just doing all this other work. I mean, I leverage AI a lot with like, give me 10 engaging podcast episodes for like this topic, or here are the main things we talked about. And it's really helpful. Like it's had me, and then it's not like I depend on it. It's just whenever I'm having writer's block, it's so helpful to have. So I think we, rather than resist it, we embrace it, and we learn how to use it for our benefit.
Mm-hmm. What's funny for me personally is that as I decided to really chase after my aspiring authorship, it was around the same time that ChatGPT was proven to be able to write entire novels, and a lot of people were discouraged by that. But for me, this is where the competitive mindset actually came in handy. Where I said, well, it's one thing to compete with other writers, but now I get to compete with the collective matrix of ideas combined into an unstoppable machine. All right, let's do this. So for me, it was actually more encouraging to almost, not, I wouldn't say like a losing battle, but certainly an uphill one against the efficiency of the robots. So last things to ask before we close this out formally. What would you say are the challenges that you're kind of facing on a day-to-day basis? Some people go granular, some people go holistic. So what kind of sticks out in your mind as what you feel you need to address about your work?
Yeah, so I would say we talked a little bit about this earlier, but for me, the whole idea of a timeline and like when things need to happen. So I've really been working through removing the timeline of when I leave my mom's house, and also removing the timeline of how quickly my business needs to grow, because there's so much to be grateful for. But I think sometimes we're so focused on where we think we should be that we forget to recognize how far we've already come. So I'm really trying to lean into that right now. But there is days when I'm just like, oh, like I feel impatient, and I'm putting a timeline on myself, and nobody else is judging me for it, but I'm judging myself, or wanting to get my clients like 100% results by tomorrow. And it's like, okay, I also have to like trust that they are going through their process. You know, I could be the best coach for them, but I also have to let them be human as well. So I would say that would be the main thing that I'm working through right now.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll give you the floor once more in case there's any other reactions or thoughts or points you wanted to make that have manifested as a result of this conversation. And then one way or another, just let the audience know where they can find you online.
Yeah, I just think, you know, if you're listening to this podcast, you obviously care about becoming a better version of yourself. So just kudos to you for that. And if you can't stop thinking about something, you should probably do it, because the fear of failure is worse than failure itself. Like fearing that failure and just having it be this cycle, like you're going to learn so much more from trying, even if it doesn't go the way that you think. And I hang out on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm actually more active on Instagram now, even though I have more followers on TikTok. But my username is the Erika, that's Erika with a K, Cruz.com. And that's my username across all platforms. So that's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn. And that's also my website. So if you go to my website, you can learn more about my programs there. Under Work With Me, we have more info about Magnetic Mastermind and Courage Driven Latina.
Awesome that you were able to get the consistent tags across. And my tags are a mess, are all over the place, to the point where I made a joke out of it, where like my Instagram is Joayani, thanks you for waiting. My TikTok is Joayani missed out on Vine. And it just spirals
Love
off
it.
there.
At least there's a theme.
Yeah. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a theme. All right, everybody. This has been an episode of the Impactful Coaching Podcast. Erika, I have to say, I'm so glad we had this conversation. I felt like we were able to exchange some really great ideas, and there's some stuff that's going to be going through my mind especially in the visualization aspect of it. That's something that I really am going to be taking away from this episode. So thank you for sitting with me today. And then to my audience, thank you to all of you as well for your participation. Couldn't do it without you. And if you have anything you want to say, you know what to do. It is Joseph at impactfulcoachingpodcast.com. JOSEPH is how that part is spelled. The rest of it, I think you can figure out. So it is our endeavor to ensure whatever way you are helping others, we want you to be impactful while you're at it.